The congressional hearing chamber was filled with an uneasy silence as Representative Jasmine Crockett carefully flipped through a thick pile of financial records, her sharp gaze steady behind her glasses. At the witness table sat Charlie Kirk, founder of Turning Point USA, usually brimming with confidence. But this time, that confidence seemed to waver. Each page Crockett placed neatly before her only deepened the tension. The C-SPAN camera zoomed in, capturing beads of sweat forming on Kirk's forehead as the moment grew heavier. "Mr. Kirk," Crockett began, her tone deliberate and razor-sharp. "Before we proceed, let me be clear. I hold here every single financial report from Turning Point USA for the past 5 years. Every donation, every expenditure, and every questionable payment is right here in my hands." The words hung in the air, almost suffocating in their weight. Kirk shifted in his seat, gripping the table's edge until his knuckles turned pale. He had come prepared with talking points about conservative youth engagement, free speech, and the strength of his organization's mission. What he had not anticipated was Crockett arriving armed with what appeared to be internal financial documents that even some within his boardroom may never have fully reviewed. With cameras rolling live, the Congresswoman leaned forward, raising a single sheet for everyone to see. "Let's begin here," she said firmly. March 2023, $347,000 marked as youth engagement activities. Yet the funds were spent at a luxury resort in Cabo San Lucas. "Mr. Kirk, can you explain this?" Instantly, the hearing room exploded with murmurs. Lawmakers craned their necks. Reporters' pens scratched rapidly. Camera shutters clicked in a frenzy. The air was electric as the man known for out-debating college students on viral YouTube clips suddenly froze, his mouth open, but no words emerging. This was no ordinary exchange. It was the start of a defining confrontation, one where Crockett, a first-term congresswoman from Texas, set out to hold one of the most prominent figures in conservative youth politics accountable. And it was a moment that would test everything Kirk had built: his image, his organization, and his influence. To grasp the gravity of what unfolded that day, it's necessary to understand both individuals and why this clash mattered so deeply. Charlie Kirk had founded Turning Point USA as a teenager, building it into a powerhouse by the time he reached 30. By 2024, the organization boasted an annual budget surpassing $80 million, with active chapters on more than 3,000 campuses. Kirk himself had become a frequent guest on Fox News, cultivated relationships with high-ranking Republican leaders, and built an online presence that stretched into the tens of millions. His brand rested on being quick-witted, sharp-tongued, and unapologetically combative against what he painted as liberal dominance in academia. His social media was filled with clips of him owning professors and dismantling arguments with so-called facts and logic. Behind the polished image, however, rumors circulated. Former employees whispered about lavish spending, extravagant trips, and questionable accounting. Journalists who tried to follow the money found themselves stonewalled with legal threats and non-disclosure agreements. Though admired in conservative circles, questions about where all that money actually went never disappeared. Jasmine Crockett was not the kind of opponent Kirk was used to. Representing Texas's 30th District, Crockett had cut her teeth as a civil rights attorney. Years in the courtroom had honed her ability to dissect complex cases with precision. She wasn't after headlines or viral clips. She was after accountability. When she entered Congress and joined the House Oversight Committee, she saw an opportunity to apply the same legal rigor she once used in defense of her clients. So when Turning Point USA's tax-exempt status became a topic of review, Crockett dug deep. She and her staff spent months filing FOA requests, interviewing whistleblowers, and piecing together a meticulous financial timeline. What emerged wasn't just questionable bookkeeping, it was a potentially damning portrait of how donor money had been spent. For Kirk, the stakes were immense. This wasn't simply about reputation. If Crockett's claims proved accurate, the fallout could mean IRS scrutiny, revocation of tax-exempt status, and even potential criminal inquiries. The empire he had built could crumble. For Crockett, this wasn't about partisan gamesmanship. It was about more fundamental issues: Whether organizations claiming to educate young people were truly living up to that mission, or whether they were enriching leadership while functioning as political machines. It was about protecting transparency and democracy and ensuring accountability in an age where dark money often blurred the lines. That Thursday morning, the committee room overflowed. Reporters from every major outlet filled the seats. Conservative media prepared to defend Kirk. Progressive journalists readied themselves for fireworks. What few anticipated was just how thoroughly Crockett had prepared, and how ill-prepared Kirk would appear against someone unwilling to rely on sound bites. Republican members of the committee, many beneficiaries of Turning Point support, shifted nervously. They knew defending Kirk would be tricky if the documents held weight. Democrats, meanwhile, sensed opportunity. They had seen Crockett's preparation in earlier meetings and knew she didn't level accusations lightly. And then came the moment that signaled Kirk's trouble. Just minutes into his polished opening statement, in which he described Turning Point's mission of promoting fiscal responsibility, free markets, and limited government, Crockett cut in. Her tone carried authority, not apology. "Mr. Kirk, when you speak of fiscal responsibility," she interrupted, "does that include the $2.3 million your organization allocated for student leadership conferences that, based on invoices, seem to primarily benefit you and senior staff?" Kirk hesitated, caught off guard. He attempted composure. "Congresswoman, all of our conferences are focused on student education and leadership development." But Crockett wasn't finished. She slid another document across the table. "Really?" "Because I have here an invoice from the Ritz-Carlton in Phoenix. January 2023. Your so-called student leadership conference included a $45,000 bar tab and a $30,000 payment for a private DJ. Is that how Turning Point educates young Americans?" Gasps rippled through the chamber. Photographers leaned in. Some Republicans stared at their notepads. Democrats tried to contain visible smirks. And Kirk, the man celebrated for never losing a debate, sat visibly shaken. What followed in the hours ahead was a systematic dismantling of Kirk's financial narrative. One by one, Crockett presented documents, each poking holes in the carefully curated image Kirk had built. The scene wasn't just political theater. It was a reminder of what happens when meticulous preparation collides with overconfidence. For viewers at home, it was gripping. For Kirk, it was devastating. And for Crockett, it was validation that facts still matter, even in an age dominated by rhetoric. This hearing wasn't simply about one man or one organization. It was about the broader question of how money flows through politics, how accountability is enforced, and how leaders are held responsible. In that chamber, the divide between rhetoric and reality was laid bare. The silence after each revelation spoke volumes. And as the hours passed, it became clear. This was no longer just Kirk defending his organization. It was a test of credibility. And Jasmine Crockett had come armed with truth. Crockett turned another page in her thick binder, her tone tightening with precision. "Here's something else," she said, holding up a document. "An expense listed as executive team building, $75,000. Mr. Kirk, can you explain how drinking at a luxury hotel qualifies as fiscal responsibility for college students?" The committee murmured, a ripple of disbelief spreading across the room. Kirk's face flushed. "That's a mischaracterization of, is it?" Crockett cut in sharply before he could finish. She adjusted her glasses. "Because I also have sworn testimony from 6 former Turning Point employees. They claim these so-called student conferences had maybe 50 students, while 200 seats were reserved for donors and staff. Would you like me to read their statements into the record?" It was like watching a prosecutor dismantle a witness, piece by piece, document by document. Each time Kirk reached for a talking point, Crockett countered with an invoice, an email, or a witness statement. He had walked in with sound bites. She came with evidence. "Let's discuss your salary, Mr. Kirk," Crockett continued, flipping to another section of her files. "According to your organization's IRS 990 forms, you paid yourself $350,000 last year. But that's not the full picture, is it?" Kirk shifted in his seat, trying to keep his composure. "My compensation is set by the board of directors, and it's appropriate for an organization of this size." Crockett raised an eyebrow. You mean your board of directors? A board that includes your childhood friend, your former business partner, and 3 wealthy donors who all receive benefits from Turning Point? Let's be honest about oversight, Mr. Kirk. But let's also get back to compensation. She ticked off her list, each number another blow. That $350,000 salary is only what's on the books. What about the $500,000 in speaking fees from Turning Point affiliates? What about the private jet access valued at $102 million? What about the luxury apartment in Phoenix that Turning Point labels as office space? That was the moment Kirk's composure cracked. His face flushed deep red. "How dare you!" he shouted, voice rising with anger. "I have dedicated my life to this movement. I've built something that reaches millions of young people. You're trying to destroy me because of my politics!" But Crockett stayed calm, which only made him look more out of control. "Mr. Kirk," she said evenly, "I don't care about your politics. I care about the potential fraud in front of me. I care about the donors, many of them elderly, who scraped together $20 or $50, believing their sacrifice was going toward student education, not your luxury lifestyle." She lifted another paper, this time an email. "Here's a message from Dorothy Williams, an 82-year-old widow from Arkansas. She donated her entire $5,000 stimulus check because she believed in your mission. Would you like me to read her reaction after learning how her money was spent?" The silence in the room was deafening. Kirk shifted uncomfortably but didn't answer. Crockett leaned in again. "And then there's your claim of 3,000 campus chapters. When my staff contacted a random sample of 100 schools on your list, 73 reported no active chapter at all. Another 15 had fewer than 5 members. How do you explain that?" At that point, Reps. Jim Jordan attempted to intervene. "Point of order, Mr. Chairman," he barked. The witness should be allowed to complete his answers without constant interruption, but even Jordan's defense couldn't stop what came next. Crockett waited for the cameras to be squarely on Kirk before unveiling her sharpest weapon. She raised a printed transcript, her voice cutting through the noise. "This is a leadership meeting transcript from December 2023. In it, Mr. Kirk, you are quoted telling your staff to, and I quote, inflate our campus numbers for the donors and make sure the real financial documents never see daylight. Would you like to explain that?" The hearing room erupted. Reporters typed furiously, breaking news alerts hitting Twitter within seconds. Camera flashes lit up the chamber even against the rules. And for perhaps the first time in his very public career, Charlie Kirk had nothing to say. His lips parted, closed, then parted again. His lawyer leaned in, whispering frantically. Finally, Kirk stammered, I would need to review the context of that conversation." Crockett's response was ice cold. "The context, Mr. Kirk, is that you've been running a grift. The context is that you've misled donors. The context is that you've built personal wealth off people who trusted you. And the context is that you got caught." The committee chairman tried desperately to restore order, calling for a recess. But it was too late. The moment was already viral. Clips of Kirk's fumbling response flooded social media, shared thousands of times per minute. The hashtag #CharlieKirkMeltdown trended nationwide, and the hearing wasn't even halfway finished. During the recess, Kirk huddled with his legal team in the hallway, ignoring reporters' shouted questions. His trademark swagger was gone. His face carried the look of a man realizing his empire was crumbling in real time. Meanwhile, Crockett stood calmly with her staff, reviewing notes, unmoved by the chaos. She wasn't celebrating. She wasn't preening for cameras. She was simply preparing for the next round, because she wasn't done, not even close. When the hearing resumed, Kirk tried a new tactic, offense. He called the inquiry a partisan witch hunt, invoked cancel culture and the deep state, and strung together every conservative buzzword he could muster. But beside Crockett's methodical evidence, the words rang hollow. "You can call this whatever you want," Crockett replied calmly after his rant. "But these are your financial documents. These are your emails. These are your recorded words. This isn't about politics. This is about potential fraud." Then she shifted the focus to the human toll. She read testimony from former Turning Point employees describing a toxic culture of fear and exploitation. She presented letters from young conservatives who felt betrayed after learning how their volunteer work was used to prop up Kirk's lifestyle. She held up one letter in particular, This is from James Patterson, a 19-year-old student who interned for Turning Point for 6 months. He writes, "I believed in the mission. I thought I was changing the world. I worked 60-hour weeks for no pay. Then I found out Charlie was using funds for luxury cars while telling us there was no money for stipends. I felt used and betrayed," Kirk tried to interject weakly. "We have thousands of satisfied interns and volunteers. How many of them know the truth?" Crockett snapped back. "How many of them realize that while they work unpaid, you're flying private to vacation homes?" The room fell silent, the tension thick, and at that moment, it was clear to everyone watching. Charlie Kirk was no longer in control of the narrative. Even some of the Republican committee members were starting to shift uncomfortably in their seats. They had arrived expecting a routine hearing, just another opportunity to defend one of their own from what they assumed would be partisan attacks. But this was different. Crockett wasn't dealing in rhetoric. She was dealing in evidence, and the documents, emails, and testimony she presented were impossible to dismiss. Representative Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez, who had been sitting quietly through most of the exchange, finally leaned into her microphone. Her tone was measured, but her words carried an unmistakable edge. "Mr. Kirk, I'd like to follow up on something Congresswoman Crockett mentioned. You claim that your mission is about educating students on free markets and capitalism. So please tell me, how does taking tax-exempt donations and using them for personal enrichment represent free market principles? Isn't that actually closer to the socialism you claim to despise, taking money from others and redistributing it to yourself?" The hearing room fell into a tense silence. All eyes turned to Kirk. His face cycled from red to pale, his lips parting as though he might attempt an answer, before clamping shut again. His lawyer leaned in close, whispering urgently. Finally, Kirk muttered into the microphone, "Congresswoman, that is a complete mischaracterization of our organization's work and mission." But before he could continue, Crockett cut in sharply. "Speaking of mischaracterization, Mr. Kirk, let's talk about your so-called professor watch list. You publicly claim it's about protecting intellectual diversity on campus. But I have internal emails, your emails, where you describe it as a tool to intimidate and silence liberal professors. How exactly does intimidation and silencing align with the free speech values you pretend to support?" Kirk visibly flinched. A murmur ran through the audience, and even some reporters raised their eyebrows. This was no longer a back and forth, it was an autopsy. And Charlie Kirk's reputation was the body on the table. But Crockett wasn't finished. She flipped through another section of her folder and continued. "We also have documented evidence of Turning Point USA using donor money for political opposition research on Democratic candidates, despite the fact that your tax-exempt status explicitly prohibits partisan political activity. You have contracts showing coordination with campaigns. You have directed student chapters to engage in activities that are blatantly political while hiding behind the label of education. The hypocrisy is breathtaking." For the first time, Crockett's voice hardened with genuine anger. "Mr. Kirk, you've built an empire on lies. You've taken advantage of young people's idealism and elderly donors' generosity. You've twisted the concept of political education into nothing more than a personal enrichment scheme. And you've done all of it while draping yourself in the flag and calling yourself a patriot." The tension in the room grew so thick that even the chairman shifted uneasily. Cameras zoomed in. Reporters typed furiously. Kirk's usual swagger was gone. Then came the moment that no one, not even Crockett's staff, had anticipated. She reached for a thick folder marked with red tabs and placed it squarely on the table in front of her. "Mr. Kirk," she said slowly, locking eyes with him, "I'd like to discuss something called the Phoenix Project. Do you know what I'm referring to?" For the first time in the hearing, Kirk's face drained of color. Not red with anger, not flushed with embarrassment. White with something much closer to fear. He turned to his lawyer, who had begun rifling through papers frantically. Kirk swallowed hard before stammering, I'm not sure what you're referring to." "Really?" Crockett asked, her tone almost mocking. She opened the folder deliberately, as if each page carried the weight of a verdict. "Because what I have here is a complete paper trail of the Phoenix Project. a scheme where Turning Point USA created fake grassroots organizations to funnel money from foreign donors into American political campaigns. "This isn't just fraud, Mr. Kirk. This is potentially treason." The room erupted into chaos. Committee members shouted over one another. Reporters leapt to their feet, cameras flashing. The chairman pounded his gavel again and again, demanding order, but no one was listening. Through the din, Crockett's voice cut like a blade. According to these documents, Turning Point USA received $15 million from foreign nationals, laundered through a web of shell companies you and your associates created. That money was then funneled directly into political campaigns that aligned with your agenda. That is a direct violation of federal law prohibiting foreign interference in American elections. Kirk's lawyer quickly grabbed his microphone. "My client invokes his Fifth Amendment right against self-incrimination." But Crockett wasn't finished, not by a long shot. She pulled out another sheet, her tone ice-cold. "Oh, he can invoke whatever he wants. These documents speak for themselves. I have bank records. I have encrypted communications that were decoded by whistleblowers. And I have testimony from 3 former Turning Point executives who were directly involved in the Phoenix Project." She raised one specific document, holding it high enough for cameras to capture. This is an email from Mr. Kirk, dated June 15, 2023. In it, he writes to his CFO, and I quote, "Make sure the Phoenix money is completely untraceable. We can't have anyone connecting it back to the foreign sources." "Tell me, Mr. Kirk, what exactly did you mean by foreign sources?" The silence was deafening. Kirk sat frozen, his lawyer's hand gripping his arm tightly. Crockett continued, "Allow me to clarify for you. The foreign sources included a Russian oligarch, a Chinese real estate developer with ties to the Communist Party, and a Saudi prince looking to manipulate American energy policy. You didn't just mislead donors. You sold out your country for personal profit." Representative Matt Gaetz tried to leap to Kirk's defense, shouting about procedural violations and demanding that Crockett be censured for her accusations. But even his loudest theatrics couldn't obscure the bombshell that had just detonated. Crockett pressed forward. "And it doesn't stop there. Here," she said, pulling out yet another document, "is a transcript of a recorded conversation between Mr. Kirk and an undercover FBI informant from August 2023. Yes, Mr. Kirk, the FBI has been investigating you for over a year. In this recording, you explicitly discuss how to conceal foreign money and disguise it as domestic donations. And I quote, 'The Arabs pay well, and as long as we keep it quiet, everyone wins.'" The gasp that swept across the room was audible even over the chairman's gavel. Reporters stood on chairs to get better angles. Phones lit up as the news spread in real time across social media. Crockett then unveiled a massive chart, money flowing from foreign sources, through shell companies, into Turning Point, and then out into political campaigns and disinformation operations. "This wasn't just about scamming donors," she declared. "This was about undermining American democracy. Turning Point USA used foreign money to bankroll voter suppression, to spread disinformation about mail-in ballots, and even to coordinate with foreign troll farms to manipulate social media. Mr. Kirk, you didn't just run a grift. You ran a foreign-backed operation to sabotage the American electoral system." The room was in absolute chaos. Republican members shouted. Democratic members demanded answers. But Charlie Kirk remained silent, his face pale, his lawyer's hand gripping his shoulder like a lifeline. For perhaps the first time in his career, Kirk had nothing to say. And everyone in that room knew it. This wasn't just the end of Charlie Kirk's credibility. It might be the beginning of his downfall.